Hello and welcome. In this video I will demonstrate how to implement the mFiles system. mFiles is an enterprise content management system. These systems are primarily interested in the collection, management, and delivery of information. Typical functions of this system include importing and creating documents, defining workflow tasks, tracking and managing multiple versions of information, and acting as a collaboration environment between users. Referring back to the assessment scenario, the ECM can help the purchasing department in many different ways, including managing the workflow of purchasing items, archive all business records with outside business partners, manage the life cycle of documents from creation till destruction. Moving on to the virtualization structure, there are three virtual machines. An application server, which will be used to run the mFiles system, manage it, and serve the mFile clients. A SQL database server to store the mFile databases, and lastly a client machine. The hardware configuration and the running operating systems are assigned as detailed in the system documentation. The mFile system components installed are added as detailed in the documentation and will be explained through the implementation. Now I will commence with the system build. Starting with the application server, I will install all the mFile components needed on the server by clicking on the mFile setup file to launch the installation wizard. In the installation type for this server, I will choose the evaluation installation, which is meant for mFile servers and essentially means that all the mFile components will be installed as opposed to normal installation where you get to choose the components to be installed. Now mFile prompts to allow the creation of a rule in the firewall to allow remote connections to the 2266 port. I will allow it as clients will use this port to connect to the mFiles server. Now that everything is installed, I will open the mFiles admin utility, and this is the tool to be used to administer the mFiles system. You can see we have two vaults by default. mFile vaults store objects, which can be users, groups, documents, workflows, and so on. We can view these vaults by using the mFiles desktop application. Switching to the database server, I will install the SQL Server RDBMS by launching the installation wizard. For the type, I will select the basic installation as mFiles doesn't require customizing any defaults in the SQL Server implementation. After the installation has finished, we can see that the instance name is set to MS SQL Server, which is essentially the name of the SQL Server copy installed. The next step would be to install the SQL Server Management Studio, which is the graphical user interface I will use to interact with the SQL Server databases. After the installation, I will open the SSMS and connect to the installed instance. The next step is to allow remote connections to the SQL Server instance, and this will be done by opening the SQL Server Configuration Manager. You can see that our SQL Server instance is running. I will enable the TCP/IP connections to the instance, so simply we will click Enable. By default, the SQL Server instance will listen to remote connections on the port 1433. So we will go to the Windows Firewall and configure it to allow connections to this port. SQL Server users can authenticate themselves by using their Windows credentials or their SQL Server credentials if they are defined users within the SQL Server service itself. By default, SQL Server authentication is disabled. I will need to enable it as it's needed by mFiles by going to the installed SQL instance properties, security tab, and allow both SQL Server and Windows authentication. Switching back to the application server, mFiles stores its vaults in either its default Firebase database like the sample vault on the left tree or the SQL Server. So I will create a new vault, call it Engineering Vault, and store it in the SQL Server we just created. I will type the name of the SQL Server and the credentials to authenticate myself to the SQL Server. We can see that the connection is established. So I will switch now to the database server. Under the current running instance databases, I can see the new engineering vault has been added. Switching to the client machine, I will install the mFiles desktop by selecting the normal installation and only choosing the mFiles desktop to be installed as it's the only needed component by the client. Next, I'm prompted with a utility to connect to an mFiles vault. I will add a new connection to the engineering vault and use the default mFiles administrator account to authenticate myself. I will attempt to access the vault using the mFiles desktop. This is the end of this demonstration. Thank you for watching.